I might have been around 11 at the time, and it was only my sister and I still living at home by then. My dad worked overnight a lot, and that night it was just us in the house. I remember it was very dark, so maybe we had went to bed less than an hour before this happened. All of a sudden, I heard someone ruffling what sounded like Christmas wrapping paper or loud plastic, maybe even tinfoil. You could hear the way they were going through it and tearing it, etc. Then I heard my sister call out my name from her room across the hall and shout, "Stop!" She sounded angry, and I remember exactly what I felt and thought when I replied. I yelled back, "That's not me." Literally, as I was completing my reply, a flood of fear and confusion thought my mind. I knew my sister, and the anger I heard in her voice was because it was scaring her too, even though she probably did think it was me. So once I said it wasn't me, I could feel the intense increase in fear that we both felt. It was very scary, and it stopped as soon as we started talking about it. My sister had another scary story from around that time, give or take a few years. She was reading a book in the living room while I was outside playing, and she would hear someone tapping on the wall, and every time she looked up to see what it was, the tapping stopped. I don't remember us ever talking about that night again, but for a period of time after that, I requested to sleep in her bed because I was scared. This had happened to me about 6 years ago. I was doing my usual routine of walking around town for a few hours, as I enjoyed walking, and I was getting my steps in for the day. I'd always start from my house, walk around town for a few hours, then turn around and head back home. I'd always go walking around noon, or an hour or two later at the latest. My walks would start at 11 a.m. at the earliest or 2 p.m. at the latest. This day in particular, I had a bunch of things to do, so I was unable to go out walking before noon. I'd eventually finished up everything that I needed to do, but it was already in the mid to late afternoon. I checked the time, and it was almost 3 p.m. I debated whether or not if I should go walking or if I should go tomorrow instead, since I had nothing going on the next day. I said fuck it and decided to go for my walk, but I told myself that I had to cut it short since I didn't want to be out after sunset since it would get pretty cold at night. I got dressed and headed out to get my walk in for the day. Fast forward almost 3 hours later, I looked at my phone to check the time, saw that it was almost 6 p.m., and started to make my way back home. I had a bit of a problem, which was, I was about 6 miles away from my house, and it would take me about an hour and a half or more to get there. The sun had fully gone down, and there was only a faint orange glow in the sky from it. The night sky had begun to take over, and the air was turning cold. I began to make my way home and had picked up the pace as I didn't want to be outside when it was cold. I was about 2 miles away from my home and thought I was in the clear when I was wrong. I passed by a convenience store when I noticed a man sitting on the side of the building smoking a cigarette. The man looked to be in his early to mid-30s, wore a black hoodie, black pants, and black shoes. I saw him turn his head towards me and he gave me a blank stare. I thought nothing of it and just ignored it. I turned around a few moments later and saw he had gotten up from his spot and began walking the same direction I was going. I kept checking behind me often to see if he would turn down another street, but he never did. After several minutes of him walking the same way as me, I hear the man start yelling, "Hey!" He then started saying other stuff to try to get my attention, which I ignored. Right after that, I heard him yell, "What the fuck?" at me in an angry tone. I sped up and didn't dare to look back at that point. I texted my dad and explained that there's some creepy guy following me and how he was yelling at me. My dad replies asking me how far I am, and I say about less than a mile away. He replies back that, to keep walking, don't worry, and that he'll come and get me in the next few minutes. I turned behind me to see if he's still following as he stopped yelling, and he was, unfortunately. I was 3/4 of a mile away from my house, and I thought about just running there. At the same time, I didn't want this guy to follow me and find out where I lived. I was about to turn down the street I lived at when something told me not to. I texted my dad and told him I passed the street and to go the other way, which he replied with okay. I kept going forward passing the street when all of a sudden I heard some kind of frantic noise. I turned around only to see to my horror that the guy put his hood up and was sprinting straight towards me. Without hesitation, I bolted straight ahead and ran across the street. I kept running for what felt like hours, until I saw a pair of headlights coming down the street. I waved my arms like a madman, hoping they would see me. Thankfully they did, and the car stopped. I got closer and saw it was my dad. I looked behind me only to see that the man who was chasing me had somehow disappeared. I got in the car and explained everything to him. He said that he was going to drive down the street to see if he could find the man and would confront him. We drove down the street, only to see nobody walking on the sidewalk or hiding behind the bushes. There was no sign of anyone being out, as the streets were empty. From that day on, I never go out walking after 2 p.m., and I since then carry a pocket knife with me whenever I go out walking for my own safety and protection. I don't know what that man would have done to me had he caught me, and I don't think I ever want to know. It was a cold October evening when I first stumbled upon the house. My car had broken down on a lonely road, and my phone was dead. The woods around me were eerily silent. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive stillness. I set off on foot, hoping to find help. The sky darkened, clouds swelling overhead. That's when I saw it. A house at the edge of the woods. 2 stories, paint peeling, shutters askew. A single light burned in an upstairs window, a pale beacon in the gloom. Something about the place felt wrong. The house leaned slightly, as if burdened by time, and the trees pressed close, their branches clawing at the siding. But with no other options, I approached. The light flickered and went out as I neared. I hesitated. "Hello?" I called. No answer. The front door creaked open, revealing darkness inside. A faint metallic smell greeted me. Every instinct screamed to leave, but desperation drove me forward. The interior was worse than the outside. Dust-coated, sagging furniture, cobwebs draped like veils, and the air was damp and heavy. "My car broke down," I said. "I need help." Silence pressed in. The kitchen was empty, counters bare, except for a rusted knife and a single plate of untouched food. The smell of decay was stronger there. I retreated to the staircase. It was warped and uneven, but I climbed. The second floor was colder, the hallway impossibly long and lined with closed doors. A faint whisper drifted ahead. The word was barely audible. My heart pounded, but I couldn't place the source. Gathering courage, I inched forward. Most doors wouldn't budge, their knobs locked or stuck, but one at the end of the hall stood ajar. I pushed it open. The room was small, empty except for a rocking chair. It swayed gently, though the air was still. A woman sat there, her back to me. Her hair was long and tangled, her dress tattered and stained. "Ma'am?" I whispered. She didn't move. I stepped closer. Her hands rested in her lap, skeletal and gray, skin stretched taut over bone. My stomach churned. "Leave," she rasped, her voice low. I stumbled back. She began to turn her head, and I knew, somehow, that I couldn't let her face me. I ran. The hallway stretched endlessly, the whispers growing louder. When I reached the stairs, they were gone, replaced by a yawning black void. I teetered on the edge. The whispers became a cacophony. "You shouldn't be here." I turned back. The woman stood just feet away, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her eyes were pits of darkness, her mouth stretched in a grotesque grin. "Stay," she whispered. Something cold brushed my back, and I lost my balance, tumbling into the void. When I awoke, I was outside, lying on damp ground. The house loomed before me, silent and dark, but its shape was wrong, twisted and warped like a shattered reflection. I scrambled to my feet and ran until I reached the road. A passing car stopped. The driver, an older man, was kind but quiet. As we drove, I glanced back, expecting to see the house, but it was gone, replaced by an unbroken line of trees. I tell myself it was a nightmare, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear her voice,